History is often written by the victors, but in the middle of the 14th century, history was nearly erased by a killer that took no sides. It didn't care if you were a king or a peasant. It didn't care if you were holy or a sinner. October 1347. The port of Messina, Sicily. The morning fog is thick. 12 Genoese galleys appear on the horizon. They float aimlessly, drifting with the tide. The dock workers rush to secure the ropes, expecting silk and spices from the east. Instead, they find a cargo of death. The silence on the decks is deafening. Most of the sailors are already dead. Their bodies are twisted in agony, covered in black swellings the size of apples. The few who are still breathing are delirious with fever. They cannot speak. They can only scream in pain. The people of Messina do not know it yet. But by touching these ropes, by breathing this air, they have just signed their own death warrants. The authorities quickly order the ships out of the harbor. But it is already too late. The rats have disembarked. The fleas have found new hosts. The clock has started ticking. But to understand this horror, we must go back 1 year earlier, to the year 1346. We find ourselves in the city of Caffa, a majestic trading hub on the Crimean Peninsula. The city is under siege by the Golden Horde, the fearsome Mongol army led by Bubonic Plague. Inside the walls, the Italian merchants are terrified. But outside the walls, the Mongol army is dying, not from swords, but from a mysterious pestilence. Soldiers are dropping like flies. Their bodies turn black and rot before they even die. Bubonic Plague knows he cannot win the city with a dying army. So he makes a decision that will doom the world. He orders his men to load the infected corpses onto their catapults. History's first act of biological warfare begins. Dead bodies raining down from the sky over the walls of Caffa. The disease spreads instantly through the city. Panic ensues. Desperate to escape the rotting bodies, the merchants board their ships and flee toward Europe. They believe they have left the horror behind. They are wrong. They are carrying the seed of the apocalypse in the hull of their ships. As they sail toward Italy, they are not just bringing goods. They are bringing the end of the world as they know it. The Black Death has arrived in Europe, and no one is safe. This is only the beginning. It moved faster than any army. From Messina, it traveled north, to Rome, to Florence, to Venice. The roads that built the Roman Empire were now highways for death. In Florence, the great poet Boccaccio witnessed the end of days. He wrote that men and women dined with their families in the morning, and dined with their ancestors in the other world, by evening. There was no warning. You could be healthy at sunrise and dead by sunset. The terror began with a simple fever. Then came the swelling. Massive, painful lumps appeared in the groin or armpits. Some grew as large as an apple, others the size of an egg. The Italians called them gavocchiolo. But that was only the beginning. Black spots would appear on the arms and thighs. The blood inside the body was rotting while the person was still alive. And then the coughing started, coughing up blood. Once the blood appeared, death was certain. Not in weeks, not in days, but often in hours. The doctors of the 14th century were helpless. They had never seen anything like this. They believed the air itself was poisoned, a miasma. Desperate for a cure, they tried everything. They bled patients with leeches to balance their humors. They placed cooked onions, or even dried toads, directly onto the open sores. Some even bathed in vinegar and rose water, but nothing worked. The doctors who tried to help became victims themselves. Soon, doctors refused to see patients. Priests refused to hear confessions. Fear is a powerful force. It can break the strongest bonds. As the plague raged on, humanity began to disappear. Chronicles from the time tell a heartbreaking story. Mothers abandoned their sick children. Husbands left their wives to die alone. Brothers turned their backs on brothers. People barricaded themselves in their homes, hoping the walls would keep the death out. But the rats were already inside. The cities were filled with the stench of death. The graveyards were full. They started digging massive trenches, throwing bodies in like cargo, layer upon layer, covered only by a thin sheet of dirt. The structures of society, law, religion, family, were crumbling. If prayer couldn't save them, and medicine couldn't save them, then who could? As the bodies piled up, the survivors began to look for someone to blame. And when fear turns to anger, the real madness begins. The plague did not respect titles. It did not bow to crowns. Kings and queens locked themselves in their high castles, believing their stone walls would protect them. They were wrong. Princess Joan of England, on her way to marry the King of Castile, died in Bordeaux. The plague took her before she even reached the altar. In the royal courts of Europe, panic set in. Servants died serving wine. Guards died at their posts. The rich realized, for the first time, that their gold could not buy them life. Outside the castles, the world was becoming a wilderness. With so many dead, there was no one left to work the fields. Crops rotted in the ground. The harvest was lost. Even the animals were not spared. Sheep and cows died by the thousands, their bodies littering the pastures. Wolves returned to the edges of the villages, emboldened by the silence, feeding on the unburied dead. Nature was taking the world back. In Avignon, France, the center of the Catholic Church, Pope Clement VI watched his world collapse. He was the most powerful man in Christendom, but he was terrified. To survive, he did something strange. He ordered 2 massive fires to be lit in his chambers. For months, he sat between these roaring flames, day and night, in the sweltering heat. He believed the fire would purify the air. He survived, but the people outside did not. As the death toll rose, a dark question began to spread. Where is God? The priests had said this was a punishment for sin. But the priests were dying too. The nuns were dying. The holy men were rotting just like the thieves. If the church could not save them, and if God was silent, then the rules of society no longer mattered. Law and order vanished. People lived for the moment, drinking, gambling, and looting, waiting for their turn to die. The human mind cannot accept chaos without a cause. They needed a reason. They needed something, or someone, to blame. Since they couldn't fight the invisible disease, they decided to fight a visible enemy. Whispers began to spread in the market squares. The wells are poisoned. Someone is doing this to us. The grief turned into rage, and the swords were sharpened. The hunt was about to begin. If the plague was God's punishment, then the people decided they must punish themselves to stop it. A strange movement emerged from Germany, the flagellants. Men and women dressed in white robes marked with red crosses, marching from town to town. They did not look for a cure. They looked for pain. They whipped their own bodies with leather straps, tipped with iron spikes. They marched, chanting hymns, blood running down their backs. They believed their blood would wash away the sins of the world. But instead of saving people, they only helped spread the disease further. But for many, self-punishment was not enough. They needed someone else to suffer. A terrible rumor began to spread like a virus. The Jews are poisoning the wells. It was a lie, a baseless, horrific lie. But in a world gone mad with grief, the lie became the truth. Torture was used to force false confessions, and once the confessions were made, the mobs gathered. In the city of Strasbourg, in February 1349, one of the darkest moments of the Middle Ages took place. The plague hadn't even reached the city yet, but the fear had. The local mob gathered the entire Jewish community, nearly 2,000 people. They were given a choice: convert or burn. They were herded into a wooden house built for this specific purpose and set on fire. It was not justice, it was hysteria, and it was theft. Once the ashes settled, the mob looted their homes and divided their money. It wasn't just the Jewish people. Anyone who looked different, anyone who acted strange, became a target. Travelers were murdered on the roads. Women who knew about herbal medicine were accused of witchcraft. Beggars were driven out of towns to starve. Humanity had turned on itself. The Black Death was killing the body, but fear was killing the soul. The fires of persecution burned bright, but they did not stop the plague. The rats kept coming. The people kept dying. Science had failed. Religion had failed. Violence had failed. And out of this hopelessness, a strange, iconic figure emerged to walk the empty streets. A beak, a hat, and a stick. The symbol of death itself was about to knock on the door. He walked through the fog like a phantom, clad in heavy waxed leather from head to toe, a wide-brimmed hat, and a face that wasn't human. The Plague Doctor. Today, we see him as a monster in horror movies. But in the 14th century, he was the last hope. Or so they thought. In reality, he was often just a witness to the end. When the doctor arrived, you knew death was not far behind. Why the beak? Was it to scare the spirits away? No, it was a primitive gas mask. Remember, they believed the disease was in the air, the smell of death, miasma. The doctor's beak was packed tight with aromatic herbs, dried flowers, spices, camphor, and sponges soaked in vinegar. They believed that by filtering the bad air through these sweet smells, they would be protected. They were breathing through a bouquet of flowers while walking through hell. The doctor never touched the patient with his bare hands. He carried a long wooden cane. He used it to lift the sheets, to examine the black boils, and sometimes to push the dying away. It was social distancing before the term existed. But despite the leather, despite the mask, and despite the stick, many doctors still died. The fleas didn't care about the costume. The treatments they prescribed were as terrifying as the disease itself. Wealthy patients were told to crush emeralds into powder and drink them, a cure that cost a fortune and did nothing. Others were told to bathe in their own urine. Some doctors even tried to transfer the disease. They would strap a live chicken or a pigeon to the patient's swollen boils, hoping the sickness would move into the bird. It sounds like madness to us, but when you are watching your family die, madness feels like the only option. Years passed. The graveyards could hold no more bodies. The fires burned out. And then, mysteriously, the dying slowed down. The plague had killed nearly half of Europe. The silence was deafening. But in that silence, something new was beginning to grow. The survivors looked around at the empty world and realized everything had changed. The old world was dead. A new age was about to be born. When the fog finally lifted, the survivors looked around at a strange new world. Europe was empty. Villages were ghost towns. But those who survived found themselves in a unique position. There was more food to eat. There was more land to farm. And for the first time in history, the poor had power. Before the plague, peasants were slaves to the land. They worked for nothing. But now, labor was scarce. There were no workers left to harvest the crops. The lords begged the peasants to work, and the peasants said, "No, not unless you pay us." Wages soared. The shackles of feudalism were shattered. The Black Death, in a twisted irony, gave freedom to the common man. But the trauma remained. The survivors could not forget what they had seen. Art changed forever. Paintings were no longer just about angels and heaven. They became obsessed with skeletons and the grave. They created the dance macabre, the dance of death. Kings, popes, and peasants, holding hands with skeletons, dancing towards the tomb, a reminder that no matter who you are, death is the great equalizer. This confrontation with death made people love life even more. People began to question old authority. They turned to science, to art, and to humanism. Out of the ashes of the plague, the Renaissance was born. The modern world rose from the graveyard of the Middle Ages. Without the Black Death, perhaps there would be no Michelangelo, no Leonardo da Vinci, no modern medicine. Today, we think the Black Death is ancient history, a dusty chapter in a book. But the bacterium, Yersinia pestis, is not extinct. It still exists today, hiding in the wild, waiting. We have antibiotics now, we have science, but we also learned a fragile lesson. Civilization is thin. It only takes one invisible enemy, one silent ship docking at a port, to change the world forever. We survived the year 1347. But the question is, are we ready for the next one?